Good evening, dear friends. I hope you've found yourself in a comfortable spot tonight, perhaps nestled in your favorite chair or tucked beneath soft blankets that smell of home and safety. Dim those lights. Let the day's worries drift away like autumn leaves on a gentle breeze, and let's embark on a new chapter together through the quiet corridors of history. Before we begin this soothing journey, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you listening from tonight? What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day? Perhaps it's a warm cup of tea, or the soft glow of candles, or simply the comfort of knowing that somewhere in the world, others are sharing this peaceful moment with you. If this content helps you relax and drift towards sleep, please subscribe to join our growing community of evening wanderers. A gentle like and share would mean the world to me. And if you have any suggestions for future stories to explore together in these quiet hours, please leave them in the comments. Tonight we're going to travel softly through time, visiting worlds both familiar and wonderfully strange. We'll walk through medieval villages where love was a careful dance of negotiation and hope, where young hearts learned to speak in the language of tokens and stolen glances. We'll journey alongside warrior queens who rode across ancient steppes, their stories whispered by campfires under star-filled skies. We'll discover nomadic peoples who carried their entire world on horseback, following the rhythm of seasons and the call of distant horizons. And we'll witness one of humanity's greatest adventures in connection, the building of a railroad that would stretch across an entire continent, binding distant shores with ribbons of steel and steam. These aren't just stories of the past, dear friends. They're gentle reminders of the countless souls who have walked this earth before us, each carrying their own dreams, fears, and quiet moments of wonder. Tonight, let their stories become a soft murmur that carries you toward rest, like the distant sound of waves against a peaceful shore. So close your eyes if you'd like, or let them rest softly wherever feels comfortable. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Feel your shoulders relaxing, your breathing deepening. We have all the time in the world tonight. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else you need to do. Just you, me, and these gentle tales from long ago. Let's begin our journey in a time when love was rarely simple, when hearts had to be clever and patient.
In the soft mist of medieval mornings, when church bells echoed across cobblestone streets and the scent of baking bread drifted from cottage windows, love existed in a world very different from our own. Imagine, if you will, a time when romance wasn't about chance encounters or spontaneous dinners, but about careful choreography, family negotiations, and the delicate art of expressing affection through symbols and silence. Picture a young woman named Marguerite, perhaps, awakening in her family's modest cottage as dawnlight filters through shuttered windows. She knows that somewhere in the village there might be a young man, maybe the blacksmith's apprentice with kind eyes, or the merchant's son who always nods politely when she passes by the market square. But unlike in our modern world, she cannot simply smile at him, strike up a conversation, or suggest they meet for an evening walk. Instead, medieval love required patience, like tending a garden through long seasons. Families held the keys to romantic possibility. Parents and guardians were the architects of affection, carefully considering not just the flutter of young hearts, but the practical realities of life. Could this union provide security? Would it strengthen family ties? Were there enough resources to support a household through harsh winters and uncertain harvests? For the wealthy, romance became even more complex, layered with considerations of land ownership, political alliances, and the intricate web of noble obligations. A knight's daughter might find herself promised to a lord she'd never met, their union designed to secure a border or settle an ancient debt. These arrangements weren't born of cruelty, but of a world where individual desire had to be balanced against the survival and prosperity of entire communities. Yet even within these constraints, love found ways to bloom. Young people developed their own quiet language of affection. A pressed flower left where it might be found, a song hummed while working in adjacent fields, a ribbon dropped and retrieved with a meaningful glance. These small gestures carried the weight of entire conversations, speaking volumes in a world where direct expression was often impossible. The medieval heart learned to be both patient and clever, finding romance in stolen moments and unspoken understanding.
As evening deepens around us, let's linger a moment longer in this world of careful courtship, where love spoke through objects rather than words, where a simple glove could carry more meaning than the most eloquent letter. In medieval times, when direct conversation between unmarried young people was heavily supervised, lovers learned to communicate through tokens, small, precious objects that became vessels for unspoken feelings. Picture the quiet ceremony of this exchange. A young man, perhaps returning from market day, carefully placing a hand-carved wooden comb near the well where he knows she draws water each morning. Or imagine her, fingers trembling slightly as she tucks a small embroidered sachet into the folds of his cloak when no one is watching. These weren't grand gestures, but whispered promises in the language of everyday objects. The giving of tokens required considerable courage and discretion. A ribbon tied to a fence post, a sprig of herbs left on a windowsill, a polished stone placed deliberately in a path, each carried the risk of misunderstanding or worse, of drawing unwanted attention from parents or neighbors who might not approve of the budding affection. For those of noble birth, tokens took on even greater significance and complexity. A knight might wear his lady's favor, perhaps a silk scarf or an embroidered sleeve during tournaments, displaying his devotion for all to see while maintaining the proper distance required by courtly convention. The lady, in turn, might accept a ring or a pendant, understanding that this acceptance carried weight beyond mere ornament. But tokens weren't only about romantic love. They were also about hope, about the human desire to be remembered and cherished. In a world where life was often uncertain and brief, these small objects became anchors of connection, tangible proof that someone cared enough to think of you when you weren't present. Sometimes tokens were returned, a gentle way of saying, "I'm flattered, but my heart lies elsewhere." Other times they were kept close, perhaps tucked into a prayer book or worn beneath clothing, secret talismans of affection that warmed the wearer through cold nights and difficult days. The beauty of the system lay in its subtlety, its recognition that the deepest feelings often require the gentlest expression. Let us continue our gentle journey through medieval romance, where every stolen glance was observed, every whispered word carefully monitored by the ever-present network of chaperones, family members, and community guardians who saw it as their sacred duty to protect virtue and preserve social order. Imagine, if you will, the delicate ballet of supervised courtship. Young Margaret wishes to speak with Thomas, the carpenter's son, but she cannot simply approach him alone. Instead, she must wait for appropriate occasions, perhaps after Sunday service when families gather in the churchyard, or during harvest festivals when the usual restrictions might be slightly relaxed. Even then, she would never be truly alone with him. Her mother might hover nearby, pretending to examine the church's rose garden while actually listening to every word.
Her younger brother might tag along, wide-eyed and curious, ready to report any improprieties to the rest of the family. The parish priest might just happen to be walking past, nodding benevolently while ensuring that all interactions remained appropriately innocent. This constant supervision wasn't born of mistrust, but of genuine care and social necessity. In a world where a young woman's reputation could be destroyed by mere rumor, where an unguarded moment might lead to scandalous gossip that could haunt a family for generations, these watchful eyes served as protection as much as restriction. For the wealthy, supervision became an elaborate choreography of propriety. Noble families employed specific servants whose only job was to accompany young ladies wherever they went. These chaperones were often older women, widows or spinsters, who understood the delicate balance between allowing natural affection to develop while maintaining the strict boundaries required by their station. Letters between sweethearts, when they existed at all, were often read by multiple family members before being delivered. Poetry had to be examined for hidden meanings or inappropriate sentiments. Even gifts of flowers were scrutinized. Certain blooms carried romantic connotations that might be deemed too forward for unmarried couples. Yet within these constraints, young love found ways to flourish. A meaningful look exchanged during communal prayer, a hand that lingered just a moment longer than necessary when passing bread at table, the way someone might time their daily chores to coincide with glimpses of their beloved. These small moments became precious beyond measure. The chaperones themselves sometimes became conspirators, older women who remembered their own youth and occasionally allowed small liberties, brief moments of semi-privacy that felt like stolen treasure to the young couples under their care. As the night settles more deeply around us, dear friends, let's drift toward those magical moments in medieval life when the usual restrictions loosened just enough to allow hearts to flutter more freely. These were the festival days, the harvest celebrations, the religious holy days when communities gathered, and for a few precious hours, young people could interact with slightly more freedom than their daily lives normally allowed. Picture the scene. A village green transformed by ribbons and garlands, tables groaning under the weight of shared food, musicians tuning their instruments as twilight approaches. The air is filled with laughter, the scent of roasted meat, and the anticipation that comes when ordinary rules are temporarily suspended. For young people who had spent months exchanging only the most careful glances, these festivals were like oases in a desert of propriety. During May Day celebrations, young men and women might participate in circle dances, their hands briefly touching as they moved through the traditional steps. The maypole dance created a sanctioned excuse for proximity, for shared laughter, for the kind of innocent physical contact that was otherwise forbidden. Couples could speak more freely during these dances, their words hidden beneath the music and the general merriment of the crowd. Harvest festivals brought their own opportunities. Working together to bring in the grain created natural moments of cooperation and teamwork. A young man might offer to help carry a heavy basket, his fingers briefly brushing hers as he took the weight. A young woman might offer him a drink of cool water, their eyes meeting over the shared cup in a moment that felt both innocent and charged with possibility. These festivals also provided opportunities for small competitions that allowed young people to show off their skills. A man might win at archery or wrestling, dedicating his victory with a formal bow to the young woman who had caught his fancy. A woman might be crowned the most skilled at weaving or honored for her beautiful singing voice, accepting the praise with the kind of grace that made hearts flutter among the watching young men. But even during these times of celebration, families remained watchful. Parents and elder siblings positioned themselves strategically around the festival grounds, ready to intervene if any interaction seemed to be moving beyond appropriate boundaries. The freedom was real, but carefully circumscribed, like a bird allowed to fly within a very specific grove of trees. Let us wander now, dear friends, away from the elaborate courtships of nobles and into the simpler, perhaps more honest world of peasant romance, where love grew alongside turnips and practical considerations, where the heart had to be as sensible as it was tender. In the cottage of Elena, a farmer's daughter, love wore work clothes and dirt-stained hands. When she looked across the village square and felt her pulse quicken at the sight of Willem, the miller's son, her feelings were filtered through very practical questions. Could he provide for a family? Did he work hard without complaint? Would he be kind to children and gentle with animals? Was his family healthy and free from the kinds of troubles that could drag a household into poverty? Romance among the common folk moved at the pace of seasons. Elena might notice Willem during the spring planting, working steadily in his family's fields, his shirt rolled up to reveal strong forearms as he guided the plow. She might appreciate the way he spoke gently to his oxen, the careful attention he paid to his work, the fact that he didn't spend his evenings drinking away his wages at the village tavern. Their courtship unfolded through shared labor and quiet observation. Perhaps Elena found reasons to walk past the mill more often, timing her errands to coincide with Willem's work schedule. Maybe Willem began choosing paths that led past her family's cottage, hoping for a glimpse of her tending the vegetable garden or feeding the chickens. When they finally spoke, their conversations centered on practical matters that revealed character. The best time to plant barley, how to care for a sick calf, whether the coming winter might be harsh. But beneath these mundane topics flowed deeper currents of understanding. She learned that he was thoughtful, patient, and reliable. He discovered that she was clever, hardworking, and possessed of the kind of steady cheerfulness that could brighten the darkest winter days. Gifts between peasant lovers were humble but meaningful. A handful of early berries, a well-made wooden spoon, a basket woven with particular care. These offerings spoke of time invested, skill applied, and thoughtfulness that went beyond mere attraction. They were promises of the kind of partnership that could weather hardship and celebrate simple joys. Marriage proposals in this world were often straightforward affairs, discussed first between families and then confirmed by the young people themselves. There might be little formal ceremony, but there was deep understanding of what they were committing to, a life of shared work, mutual support, and the hope that affection would deepen into lasting love through the trials and blessings that lay ahead. As our evening journey continues, dear friends, let's witness one of those moments that has echoed through centuries, the wedding day in medieval times, when individual hearts were joined not just in love, but in the complex web of family obligations, community expectations, and the hope for a secure future. The morning of Elena and Willem's wedding dawns gray and soft, with mist rising from the fields like the breath of sleeping earth. In her family's cottage, Elena is being helped into her best gown. Not white, for white is the color of wealth and status far beyond her family's means, but a deep blue that brings out her eyes, carefully sewn and embroidered by her mother and aunts during long winter evenings. Her bouquet is simple, herbs from her garden that symbolize fidelity and prosperity, tied with ribbons saved from the previous year's harvest festival. There are no elaborate preparations, no teams of servants arranging flowers or musicians rehearsing complex pieces. Instead, there is the quiet bustle of a community coming together to witness and bless a union that will strengthen the bonds between two families. The ceremony itself takes place in the village church, a stone building worn smooth by centuries of weather and the touch of countless hands. The priest, Father Benedict, has known both bride and groom since they were children, His words carry the weight of genuine affection, as well as sacred authority. He speaks of the responsibilities of marriage, the need for patience and forgiveness, the importance of working together through whatever hardships life might bring. Willem's voice is steady as he makes his vows, though Elena can see his hands trembling slightly when he places the simple iron ring on her finger. Her own voice wavers just a little as she promises to honor and support him, to share in his joys and sorrows, to build a life together based on mutual respect and growing love. After the ceremony, the celebration is modest but heartfelt. Tables are set up in the churchyard, laden with food that each family has contributed according to their means. There is fresh bread, cheese made by the village dairymaid, ale brewed by Willem's uncle, and a special cake prepared by the baker's wife as her gift to the new couple. As evening approaches and the celebration winds down, Elena and Willem walk hand in hand toward their new home, a small cottage that Willem has been preparing for months, patching the roof, mending the walls, building furniture with his own hands. It's humble, but it's theirs, a place where they can begin the long, patient work of building a life together.
Now, dear friends, as the night deepens around us like a soft blanket, let's explore those rare and dangerous moments when medieval hearts refused to follow the paths that family and society had laid out for them. These stories of forbidden love burn brighter in memory precisely because they were so risky, so unlikely, so beautifully reckless. In the shadowy corridors of Ravenscroft Castle, Lady Isabel paces restlessly in her chamber, moonlight streaming through the narrow window to illuminate a face marked by both determination and fear. She has been promised to Lord Aldrich, a man twice her age, whose lands adjoin her father's estates. It's a practical match, one that will secure trade routes and strengthen political alliances. But her heart belongs to someone entirely unsuitable. Sir Gareth, a landless knight with nothing to offer but his sword, his honor, and a love so deep it makes her ache with longing. Their romance began innocently enough during the long winter months when Sir Gareth served as weapons master to her younger brothers. She noticed first how patient he was with the boys, how he could make them laugh even during the most difficult training sessions. Then she began to observe the quiet dignity with which he accepted his humble position, never showing resentment toward those who had inherited what he could only earn through service. Their first conversation took place in the castle library, a room rarely visited by anyone except the elderly chaplain. Lady Isabel had retreated there to escape the tedious embroidery that filled her afternoons, while Sir Gareth had come seeking maps for a boundary dispute he was helping to resolve. They spoke of books at first, then of dreams, then of the strange loneliness that can exist even in the midst of a crowded court. These meetings became regular, though both understood the danger they courted. If discovered, Sir Gareth would face exile or worse, while Lady Isabel would be confined to a convent, her marriage prospects destroyed and her family's reputation stained. Yet they continued to meet, drawn together by something stronger than caution. Their love letters, written in Latin to disguise their true nature should they be discovered, were hidden in a hollow oak tree beyond the castle walls. They developed a code based on religious terminology, writing of prayers when they meant longing, of pilgrimage when they meant their hope to somehow be together. The crisis came when Lady Isabel's father announced that her wedding would take place in just 6 weeks, much sooner than previously planned. Unable to bear the thought of a life without each other, she and Sir Gareth made the desperate decision to elope, fleeing the castle on a moonless night with nothing but the clothes on their backs and their absolute faith in each other.
Let us continue, dear friends, following Lady Isabel and Sir Gareth as they ride through the darkness toward an uncertain future, their horses' hooves muffled by thick grass wet with dew.
Behind them lies everything they have ever known: family, security, social position. Ahead lies only hope and the promise they have made to each other. They ride toward the Abbey of St. Agnes, 3 days' journey from Ravenscroft Castle, where Father Marcus, Sir Gareth's old mentor, has agreed to perform a secret marriage ceremony. It's a tremendous risk for the elderly priest, who could face severe punishment from church authorities for conducting a marriage without proper permissions and announcements. But Father Marcus remembers Sir Gareth as a boy, orphaned and alone, and he cannot find it in his heart to deny him this chance at happiness. The journey is fraught with dangers beyond the obvious ones. They must avoid the main roads where pursuit is most likely, choosing instead to follow deer trails and ancient paths through dense forests. Lady Isabel, accustomed to the luxuries of castle life, says nothing about her discomfort as they sleep beneath stars and eat only what Sir Gareth can hunt or forage. On the second night, as they huddle together for warmth beside a carefully concealed fire, she speaks softly of her fears. Not of poverty or hardship, she has accepted those as the price of love, but of the pain they have caused her family, the shame that will follow them, the uncertainty of their future. Sir Gareth holds her close, promising that somehow they will build a life together, perhaps in a distant land where their story is unknown. They reach the abbey as dawn breaks on the third day, exhausted but alive, with the desperate hope of lovers who have risked everything for each other. Father Marcus, his face grave but his eyes kind, performs the ceremony in the small chapel, with only 2 young novices as witnesses. The words are the same as those spoken in grand cathedrals, but they carry special weight here in this simple setting, chosen by love rather than arrangement. But their joy is brief. Even as they speak their vows, they know that pursuit cannot be far behind. Lady Isabel's father, Lord Geoffrey, is not a man to accept such defiance quietly. His honor demands that his daughter be returned and the landless knight who dared to steal her be punished. The search parties find them 2 days later, still within the abbey walls, where they had hoped to claim sanctuary. The confrontation is swift and brutal. Sir Gareth, refusing to hide behind his new wife's skirts, faces Lord Geoffrey's men with dignity intact. His last words to Lady Isabel are a whispered promise that their love was worth every consequence.
As we settle deeper into the peaceful darkness of this evening, dear friends, let's turn our attention to a different kind of love story, one that unfolded within the walls of monasteries and convents, where men and women had pledged their hearts to God, but sometimes found them stirring with very human emotions. In the convent of Holy Cross, Sister Marguerite meals in the small chapel during the silent hour before dawn, her breath visible in the cold air, her hands folded in prayer. She has been here for 3 years, having entered the religious life not from deep calling, but from practical necessity. The 4th daughter of a minor noble family, with no dowry large enough to secure a suitable marriage. At first, the peace and structure of convent life felt like a refuge from the uncertain world outside these walls. But something has changed in recent months, something that makes her prayers feel scattered and her sleep restless. Brother Thomas from the nearby Benedictine monastery has been coming weekly to help with the convent's accounts, his skill with numbers far exceeding that of anyone in the women's community. What began as purely practical collaboration has gradually become something else. Conversations that linger longer than necessary, glances that carry more meaning than they should, a growing awareness of each other that both try desperately to ignore. Neither seeks this complication. Brother Thomas entered the monastery after losing his young wife to fever, seeking solace in a life dedicated to God and learning. Sister Marguerite finds herself drawn not just to his gentle manner and quick mind, but to the glimpses she catches of the man beneath the monk's robes, his patience with the elderly sisters, his quiet kindness to the convent servants.
the way his eyes light up when discussing the philosophical texts he copies in the monastery's scriptorium. Their friendship develops slowly, carefully, always within the bounds of their religious duties, but gradually becoming the brightest part of each week for both of them. They speak of theology and philosophy, of the challenges of monastic life, of the books they are reading and the prayers that bring them comfort. Yet underneath these safe topics flows an undercurrent of something deeper, more dangerous. The crisis comes when Sister Marguerite falls ill with a fever that keeps her confined to the infirmary for several weeks. Brother Thomas, learning of her condition, finds reasons to visit more frequently, bringing books he thinks might comfort her, offering to assist with calculations that have been neglected during her absence. In her weakened state, she speaks more freely than usual, and he responds with a tenderness that reveals far too much of his true feelings. Mother Superior Benedetta, wise in the ways of human nature, recognizes what is developing between them long before they acknowledge it themselves.
The autumn rain patters gently against the convent windows as Mother Superior Benedetta sits across from Sister Marguerite in her private chamber, the older woman's face kind but grave. Between them lies the weight of vows taken, promises made to God, and the very human struggle of hearts that have found each other despite their best intentions to remain solitary. "My child," Mother Benedetta says softly, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who has guided many souls through moments of crisis. "I have seen this before. The heart does not always follow the path we set for it, even when that path is illuminated by faith and dedication. The question we must ask is not whether you feel this attachment, I can see that you do, but what you intend to do with these feelings." Sister Marguerite sits with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the simple wooden cross that hangs on the wall behind Mother Superior's chair. She has been expecting this conversation, dreading it, knowing that her growing feelings for Brother Thomas have not gone unnoticed in a community where the slightest change in routine or demeanor is observed and discussed. "I have tried to pray these feelings away," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I have spent hours in the chapel, asking for strength to remember my vows, to focus my love entirely on God, but my heart feels divided, and I fear I am betraying both my calling and these unexpected feelings." Mother Benedetta nods with understanding. "Love is not sin, child. Even love between a man and woman who have chosen the religious life. The sin lies in what we do with that love, how we allow it to guide our actions. Some souls are called to love God through solitude and prayer. Others find their path to the divine through human connection and family. The challenge is determining which path is truly yours." The conversation that follows is long and gentle, exploring not just Sister Marguerite's feelings, but her deeper understanding of her religious calling. Has she been hiding from the world within these walls, using the convent as a refuge from choices she was afraid to make? Or does she genuinely feel called to a life of prayer and service, with these current feelings merely a test of her dedication? Meanwhile, Brother Thomas faces his own reckoning with Brother Anselm, the elderly monk who serves as spiritual director for the men's community. Their conversation takes place while walking the monastery's herb garden, the scent of lavender and rosemary carried on the cool evening air. Brother Anselm listens without judgment as Thomas confesses his growing attachment to Sister Marguerite, his confusion about whether these feelings represent a failure of his vows or a sign that God might be calling him to a different path. As the seasons turn and winter settles over both the convent and monastery, dear friends, we find our two souls at a crossroads that will determine not just their earthly happiness, but their understanding of their spiritual calling. The resolution comes not through dramatic confrontation, but through quiet contemplation, and the hard-won wisdom of those who have walked similar paths before them. Sister Marguerite spends long hours in prayer and consultation with Mother Benedetta, gradually coming to understand that her feelings for Brother Thomas, while genuine, have awakened in her a longing for a different kind of life than the one she has chosen. She realizes that she entered the convent not from deep calling, but from lack of alternatives, and that her growing love has shown her a glimpse of the life she might have had if circumstances had been different. Brother Thomas, through his conversations with Brother Anselm and his own prayer and study, reaches a similar understanding. His love for Sister Marguerite is real and deep, but it is also revealed to him that his grief over his first wife's death was not fully healed when he took his vows. He joined the monastery seeking escape from pain rather than genuine calling to the religious life. The process of seeking release from their vows is lengthy and complicated, requiring appeals to church authorities and careful examination of their original commitment. But both communities support their decision, recognizing that vows taken for the wrong reasons, however sincere at the time, cannot be sustained without causing spiritual harm to all involved. On a spring morning, almost exactly a year after they first acknowledged their feelings, Thomas and Marguerite meet as man and woman rather than monk and nun, in the garden of Mother Benedetta's sister, who has offered her home as a neutral place for this momentous reunion. Both are dressed in simple secular clothes, both somewhat awkward in their new freedom, but both certain that they have followed the path that leads to truth. Their wedding takes place quietly in a small parish church, witnessed by a few friends from both communities who have supported their difficult journey. It is not the grand celebration that might have marked their union had they met under different circumstances, but it carries a depth of meaning that comes from choices made in full awareness of their cost. They settle in a small town where Thomas can use his scholarly skills as a teacher and scribe, and where Marguerite can apply the administrative abilities she developed in the convent to helping manage the affairs of the local church. Their love, tested by separation and scrutiny, deepens into a partnership that serves not only their own happiness, but the broader community that has welcomed them. Their story becomes a quiet legend in both the convent and monastery they left behind, a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of faith is admitting when our understanding of God's will for our lives needs to change.
Now, dear friends, as the night grows deeper and our journey through time continues, let us travel far from medieval Europe to the vast grasslands of ancient Asia, where a different kind of story unfolds under endless skies. Here, where the wind carries the scent of sage and the thunder of horses' hooves, we encounter Tomyris, queen of the Masagatai, whose name echoes through history like a war cry carried on the evening breeze. Picture, if you will, a world without cities, without stone walls or cultivated fields. Instead, imagine rolling plains that stretch beyond the horizon, dotted with herds of horses and cattle, where entire communities live in felt tents that can be packed and moved with the changing seasons. This is the realm of the nomadic peoples, where survival depends not on the strength of fortifications, but on the ability to move swiftly, to read the subtle signs of weather and terrain, and to make calculated decisions that could mean the difference between prosperity and starvation. Tomyris rules this mobile kingdom with a wisdom earned through years of leading her people through droughts and harsh winters, negotiating with neighboring tribes, and making the countless decisions that keep a nomadic society functioning. She is not a queen who sits on a throne in a palace, receiving petitioners in a formal court. Instead, she is a leader who rides with her warriors, who knows the name of every horse in her herds, who can read the sky for signs of coming weather and the grass for indications of the best grazing grounds. Her people, the Masagatai, are warriors and herders, following ancient patterns of migration that their ancestors established centuries ago. They are skilled in the arts of war, particularly mounted archery, but they fight primarily to defend their way of life rather than to conquer and rule over others. Their wealth is counted in livestock rather than gold. Their power measured by the loyalty of their followers rather than the extent of their territories. The queen herself is a figure of remarkable presence, tall and straight in the saddle, her dark hair braided with silver ornaments that catch the light as she moves, her voice carrying clearly across the camp when she calls her council together. She has earned her position, not through inheritance alone, but through proven ability to lead her people safely through crisis and conflict. In the golden tent that serves as Tomiris's council chamber, the Persian messengers wait nervously as the queen considers their emperor's proposal. These are men accustomed to being received with awe and submission, representatives of the greatest empire the world has yet seen, bearers of an offer from Cyrus the Great himself, the conqueror of Babylon, the liberator of the Jews, the king who has never known defeat. But Tomiris regards them with the calm assessment of someone who has spent her life evaluating the true worth of things beneath their surface appearance. She sees beyond their fine robes and formal courtesies to the underlying assumption that drives their mission, that her kingdom, like all others, can be acquired through either negotiation or force, and that she, like all rulers, must choose between submission and destruction. The queen's response is delivered with the quiet dignity that marks true nobility. She thanks the messengers for conveying their emperor's offer and instructs them to return to Cyrus with her polite but firm refusal. She has no need of a husband, she explains, and her people have no desire to become subjects of the Persian Empire. They are content with their ancient ways, their freedom to move across the steppes as their ancestors have done for countless generations. But Tomiris is not naive. She knows that this refusal will likely be followed by force, that Cyrus is not a man who accepts being denied something he desires. As soon as the Persian messengers disappear across the southern horizon, she begins preparing her people for war. Scouts are sent out to watch for the movement of armies. Weapons are sharpened and tested, and the various clans that make up the Massagete Confederation are warned to be ready for rapid mobilization. The preparations are thorough, but not panicked. These are a people who have faced danger before, who understand that survival often depends on the ability to respond quickly and effectively to threats. Women and children know their roles in the event of battle. Herds are moved to safer grazing grounds, and the warriors practice the coordinated maneuvers that make nomadic cavalry so devastatingly effective. Tomiris herself spends long hours in consultation with her advisors and war chiefs, men and women whose counsel she has learned to trust over years of shared decision-making. They discuss strategy and tactics, but also the deeper question of what they are truly fighting for. Not just their lives and freedom, but their entire way of life, the patterns and traditions that make them who they are. When news finally comes that Cyrus has indeed crossed the Eryxis River with a massive army, Tomiris receives it with the calm resolution of someone who has been expecting this moment and is prepared to meet it with all the strength and cunning at her command.
The autumn wind carries the scent of distant smoke as Tomiris stands at the edge of her camp, looking south toward the river where Persian scouts have been spotted. At her side stands her son, Spargapeses, a young man whose courage and skill have already marked him as a future leader of their people. The queen's heart is heavy, not with fear. She has moved beyond fear into the cold clarity that comes before battle, but with the knowledge of what this conflict will cost, regardless of its outcome. Spargapeses volunteers to lead the first engagement against the Persian forces, and after long consideration, Tomiris agrees. It is not an easy decision. He is her only son,
the continuation of her bloodline and the hope of her people. But he is also one of her most capable commanders, and the respect of the warriors for his leadership could be crucial in the battles to come. The trap that Cyrus sets is cleverly conceived. Persian forces retreat from what appears to be a supply camp, leaving behind wine and rich foods that are almost impossible for nomadic warriors to resist. When Spargapeses and his men attack the seemingly abandoned camp and celebrate their easy victory with the captured wine, the Persians return to find them drunk and unprepared for battle. The capture of her son hits Tomyris like a physical blow, but she cannot allow her personal anguish to cloud her judgment as a leader. She sends a message to Cyrus, couched in formal diplomatic language but carrying an unmistakable threat: return her son and withdraw from Massagetai lands, or face the full fury of her people in battle. Her words are later recorded by the historian Herodotus: "Give me back my son and leave our land in peace. But if you refuse, I swear by the son who is our master that I will give you your fill of blood." When news reaches her that Spargapeses has taken his own life rather than face the shame of captivity, something fundamental changes in the queen. The mother's grief mingles with the warrior's rage, and both are tempered by the ruler's cold understanding of what must now be done. There can be no negotiation, no compromise, no mercy. This has become a war of extermination, and she intends to be the one left standing when it ends. The army that Tomyris leads into the final battle is unified by more than just loyalty to their queen. They are bound together by shared outrage at the treachery that cost them a beloved prince, by determination to avenge not just his death, but the insult to their entire people. They ride into combat not as individual warriors, but as a single instrument of retribution, guided by a leader whose tactical brilliance has been sharpened to a razor's edge by the loss of everything she held most dear.
The final battle between Tomyris and Cyrus unfolds on a plain where the autumn grass has been flattened by the hooves of countless horses, where the air is thick with dust and the cries of warriors who know that everything they hold sacred hangs in the balance. This is not a conflict between mere armies, but a collision between two entirely different ways of understanding the world: the imperial vision that sees all lands as potential provinces, and the nomadic understanding that some things cannot be conquered, only defended. Tomyris leads her warriors with the calculated fury of someone who has moved beyond personal emotion into a realm of pure strategic thinking. Every decision she makes is informed by her intimate knowledge of the terrain, her understanding of her enemy's strengths and weaknesses, and her awareness that she must not merely win this battle, but win it so decisively that no other empire will be tempted to test the Massagetai in the future. The Persian forces, despite their reputation for invincibility, find themselves fighting at every disadvantage. The narrow confines that Tomyris has chosen for the battlefield negate their superior numbers, while the mobility and archery skills of the nomadic warriors prove devastatingly effective in the close-quarters combat that develops. More importantly, the Massagetai are fighting for their homes, their freedom, and their way of life, while the Persians are fighting for the ambitions of a distant emperor. When Cyrus falls, whether struck down by Tomyris's own hand or killed by one of her warriors, remains unclear in the historical accounts. The psychological impact on his forces is immediate and catastrophic. The man who had seemed invincible, who had conquered Babylon and humbled proud kingdoms, lies dead in the dust of the steppes, brought low by a nomadic queen whose name he had probably never heard before he decided to add her lands to his empire.
The aftermath of the battle, as recorded by Herodotus, carries a savage poetry that speaks to the depth of Tomyris's grief and rage. Finding Cyrus's body among the fallen, she has his head severed and thrust into a wineskin filled with human blood, fulfilling her earlier promise, "You thirsted for blood, and now I give you your fill." It is an act that horrifies civilized sensibilities, but perfectly captures the raw justice of a world where actions have immediate and personal consequences. Yet even in victory, Tomyris remains fundamentally what she has always been, a nomadic ruler whose power is measured not by the extent of her conquests, but by her ability to preserve her people's freedom to live as they choose. She does not attempt to pursue the fleeing Persian forces or to establish an empire of her own. Instead, she leads her people back to their traditional grazing grounds, content to have demonstrated that there are some lines that even the greatest empires cannot cross with impunity.
As our journey through the night continues, dear friends, let us pause to consider the world that shaped Tomyris and countless other nomadic peoples. A world without permanent boundaries, where home was wherever the herds could graze and the sky stretched endlessly overhead. This way of life, so different from our own settled existence, offers us a different understanding of wealth, power, and what it means to be truly free. Imagine awakening each morning in a felt tent that could be dismantled and loaded onto pack animals within an hour. Your walls are not stone or wood, but woven wool that breathes with the wind, that can be made warm in winter and cool in summer through the ancient wisdom of its construction. Your floor is not fixed wood or tile, but carpets and furs that can be rolled up and carried, that make every temporary dwelling feel like home. The herds that surround your camp are not merely livestock, but the foundation of your entire economy and way of life. Horses provide transportation and military advantage, their speed and endurance making it possible to cover vast distances and strike swiftly when necessary. Cattle and sheep provide milk, meat, leather, and wool, while goats can survive on vegetation too poor for other animals, serving as insurance against lean years when the grazing is sparse. But beyond their practical value, these animals are partners in a way that settled peoples often find difficult to understand. A nomadic herder knows each animal individually, understands their personalities and preferences, can read their behavior for signs of changing weather or the presence of predators. The relationship between herder and herd is one of mutual dependence and deep familiarity, built through daily contact and shared survival. The social structure of nomadic societies reflects this emphasis on mobility and adaptation. Leadership is typically based on demonstrated ability rather than rigid hierarchy, since the challenges of nomadic life require quick decision-making and flexible response to changing circumstances. A leader who cannot read weather patterns, negotiate with neighboring tribes, or organize effective defense against raiders will not long remain in power, regardless of their bloodline or formal title. Women in many nomadic societies enjoy considerably more freedom and authority than their counterparts in settled civilizations. When everyone must contribute to the work of survival, and when the ability to fight effectively can mean the difference between life and death, gender roles become more fluid and practical. The archaeological evidence shows us female warriors buried with their weapons, female leaders commemorated alongside their male counterparts, and a tradition of powerful queens like Tomyris who ruled not as exceptions, but as part of a broader pattern of female authority.
Let us drift now, dear friends, across the vast grasslands where the Scythians once rode, those masters of mounted warfare who dominated the steppes for nearly 1,000 years before Tomyris ever drew breath. Their story, preserved in the writings of Herodotus and revealed by the archaeologist Spade, shows us the deep roots of the nomadic tradition that would later produce such remarkable figures as the Masagetai queen. The Scythians emerged from the mists of prehistory around the 9th century BCE, spreading across the lands from the Black Sea to the borders of China. They were not a single people, but a confederation of related tribes bound together by shared customs, similar languages, and above all, by their mastery of the horse. In their hands, mounted archery became an art form as elegant as it was deadly, allowing small groups of warriors to defeat much larger forces through superior mobility and tactical sophistication. Their burial mounds, called kurgans, dot the landscape of southern Russia and Central Asia like ancient monuments to a vanished way of life. When archaeologists opened these tombs, they found treasures that speak to the wealth and artistic sophistication of nomadic culture. Golden ornaments worked in the distinctive animal style that shows stylized beasts locked in eternal combat. Felt carpets and wall hangings preserved by the frozen ground, and the mummified remains of warriors, both male and female, buried with their weapons and their horses. Perhaps most remarkably, they found evidence of the warrior women that Herodotus had described, women whose bones showed the distinctive muscle development and battle wounds that come from a lifetime of mounted combat. These were not mythical Amazons, but real people, nomadic women who fought alongside their men and were honored in death with the same grave goods and ceremonial treatment accorded to male warriors. The Scythians' relationship with the settled civilizations around their borders was complex and constantly shifting. They served as mercenaries for Greek city-states, traded grain and furs for manufactured goods, and occasionally raided when diplomacy broke down or tribute payments were interrupted. But they never allowed themselves to be absorbed or controlled by their more numerous neighbors, maintaining their independence through constant movement and the threat of devastating retaliation against any who tried to conquer them. Their religion was as mobile as their lifestyle, centered on the worship of natural forces, wind, fire, earth, and sky, rather than gods housed in permanent temples. Their priests were shamans who could enter trance states and communicate with the spirit world, guiding their people through the difficult decisions that nomadic life constantly demanded. Sacred fires burned in portable braziers that could be carried from camp to camp, and their most important ceremonies took place under the open sky rather than within constructed walls.
From the grasslands of the Scythians, dear friends, let us journey across continents to another landscape that shaped a different but equally remarkable nomadic culture, the vast deserts of Arabia, where the Bedouin peoples learned to find life and freedom in lands that others considered uninhabitable wasteland. Here, in the seemingly endless expanse of sand and rock, where the sun beats down mercilessly by day and the stars shine with crystalline clarity by night, the Bedouin developed a way of life perfectly adapted to one of Earth's most challenging environments. Their secret was not to fight the desert, but to understand it so completely that they could move through it as easily as farmers move through their fields. Water, scarce and precious, became the organizing principle around which all of Bedouin life revolved. They knew every oasis, every hidden spring, every place where rare rainfall might collect in rock pools that could sustain life for a few precious days. Their routes across the desert were determined not by the shortest distance between 2 points, but by the availability of water for their camels, those remarkable creatures that made desert nomadism possible. The camel was to the Bedouin what the horse was to the Scythians, not merely transportation, but partner, wealth, and survival, all combined in a single animal. Camels provided milk that could be drunk fresh or churned into butter, meat for special occasions, wool for weaving, and leather for crafting everything from water bags to tent walls. Most importantly, they could carry heavy loads across distances that would kill horses, surviving for days without water and finding nourishment in desert plants too bitter or thorny for other animals to eat. Bedouin society was organized around the extended family and the clan, with leadership typically falling to those who had proven their ability to navigate the complex challenges of desert survival. Honor, called sharaf, was the currency that mattered more than gold, and hospitality to strangers was not merely custom, but sacred obligation. A Bedouin tent might shelter travelers for 3 days without any questions being asked about their identity, purpose, or ability to pay. Their poetry, recited around campfires under star-filled skies, preserved not only their history and traditions, but served as entertainment, news service, and legal system all in one. Master poets were honored above wealthy merchants, and a well-crafted verse could settle disputes, cement alliances, or preserve the memory of great deeds for generations. Like other nomadic peoples, the Bedouin maintained a complex relationship with the settled civilizations on the edges of their territory. They served as guides for trade caravans crossing the desert, sold camels and desert products in the markets of Damascus and Baghdad, and sometimes raided merchant trains when other sources of income proved insufficient.
As we continue our gentle journey through the night, dear friends, let us visit perhaps the most famous of all nomadic peoples, the Mongols, whose very name became synonymous with swift conquest and empire building on an unprecedented scale. Yet their story begins not with grand ambitions, but with the simple struggle for survival on the harsh steppes of Mongolia. In those wind-swept grasslands, where winter temperatures could drop far below zero and summer droughts could kill entire herds, life was a constant negotiation between human ambition and natural limitations. The Mongol tribes that would eventually conquer half the known world began as small groups of herders and hunters, living in felt tents called gurs, following their animals across the endless grass in search of the best grazing. Their society was organized around the principle of meritocracy. Leadership went to those who could keep their people alive and prosperous, regardless of their birth or family connections. When a young man named Temujin began uniting these scattered tribes under his leadership, he did so not through inherited authority, but through demonstrated ability to win battles, forge alliances, and create a new kind of military organization that transcended traditional tribal loyalties. What made Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, truly revolutionary was his understanding that the nomadic way of life, properly organized, could be an unstoppable force for conquest rather than merely a strategy for survival. He took the mobility, archery skills, and tactical flexibility that had always been nomadic strengths and combined them with military discipline, strategic planning, and psychological warfare on a scale the world had never seen. The Mongol army that emerged from this transformation was unlike anything that had come before. Every warrior was a skilled horseman and archer, capable of firing accurately while riding at full gallop. They could cover enormous distances in short periods of time, appearing suddenly where their enemies least expected them, and disappearing just as quickly when the tactical situation demanded retreat. But they were more than just raiders. Under Genghis Khan's leadership, they developed sophisticated techniques for siege warfare, learned from Chinese and Persian engineers. They created an intelligence network that gathered information about their enemy's strengths and weaknesses long before the fighting began. Most importantly, they understood that lasting conquest required not just military victory, but the establishment of systems that could govern and unite the diverse peoples they had defeated. The empire that resulted from their conquests stretched from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to India, the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Yet remarkably, it remained fundamentally nomadic in character, with the Khans continuing to live in portable palaces that could be moved as circumstances required.
In all of these nomadic cultures, dear friends,
one relationship stands out as fundamental to everything else: the bond between rider and horse. A partnership so deep and essential that it shaped not only military tactics, but the entire worldview of peoples across the steppes and deserts. To understand nomadic life, we must understand this relationship that goes far beyond mere transportation or tools of war. A nomadic child learned to ride before learning to walk properly, growing up in the saddle as naturally as settled children grew up learning to tend gardens or work at crafts. The horse was teacher, protector, and companion, as essential to survival as food or shelter. A skilled rider could control their mount with subtle shifts of weight and pressure, leaving both hands free to use a bow or spear, making possible the kind of mounted archery that gave nomadic warriors their devastating battlefield advantage. But the relationship went deeper than practical utility. Horses were individuals with distinct personalities, preferences, and abilities, and successful nomads learned to read their animals as clearly as they read weather patterns or the movement of game. A good horse could sense danger before its rider, find water in the most unlikely places, detect approaching storms hours before human senses could perceive them, and navigate treacherous terrain with the sure-footedness that comes from generations of careful breeding and partnership. As the night deepens around us, dear friends, let us pause to truly understand this extraordinary relationship that shaped not just military tactics, but entire worldviews. Picture a young Scythian child, perhaps no more than 4 years old, being lifted onto the back of a gentle mare for the first time. There's no saddle, no stirrups, just small hands gripping the animal's mane and learning to move as one with this powerful breathing creature beneath them. This wasn't merely riding instruction. It was the beginning of a spiritual bond that would define the rest of their life. The horse became teacher, friend, and eventual partner in all of life's great adventures and challenges. Through long summer days spent following the herds across endless grasslands, child and horse learned each other's rhythms, developing an almost telepathic communication that would prove invaluable in the heat of battle. The nomadic understanding of horses went far deeper than their practical value as transportation or weapons of war. Each horse had its own personality, its own preferences and quirks, its own way of responding to different situations. A skilled rider could read their mount's mood as easily as they could read the sky for signs of changing weather, understanding when the animal was fresh and ready for a hard ride, when it needed rest, when it sensed danger that human eyes couldn't yet perceive. In many nomadic cultures, horses were believed to possess spiritual qualities that connected the earthly realm with the divine. Shamans rode specially chosen horses during ritual journeys to the spirit world. Warriors were often buried with their favorite mounts, ensuring that their partnership would continue in whatever realm awaited them beyond death. The loss of a beloved horse was mourned as deeply as the loss of a family member. The breeding and training of horses became an art form passed down through generations. Nomadic peoples developed techniques for creating animals that were not just fast and strong, but intelligent, loyal, and capable of the kind of split-second decision-making that could mean the difference between life and death in combat. These weren't just domesticated animals. They were partners in survival, allies in a world where weakness meant extinction. The tactical advantages that this relationship provided were revolutionary. While settled armies relied on formations and fixed positions, nomadic warriors could flow across the battlefield like water,
appearing suddenly where they were least expected and disappearing just as quickly when the situation demanded retreat. Their horses could gallop full speed while their riders accurately fired arrows, turned sharp corners without losing momentum, and maintained their pace for hours across terrain that would exhaust other mounts. But perhaps most importantly, the bond between nomadic peoples and their horses represented a philosophy of life that valued freedom, mobility, and adaptation over permanence and rigid structure. In a world where settled civilizations built walls and tried to control their environment, nomads chose to work with natural forces, to read the subtle signs that nature provided, and to remain flexible in the face of changing circumstances. As we drift deeper into this peaceful evening, let us carry with us the image of that ancient partnership, rider and horse moving together across moonlit steppes, their silhouettes dark against the star-filled sky, free to roam wherever the wind might take them. It's a reminder that some of humanity's most profound relationships have not been with other humans, but with the animals that chose to share our journey, teaching us lessons about trust, communication, and the delicate balance between independence and interdependence. The horse's hoofbeats fade into the distance now, carrying us gently toward sleep, toward dreams of endless horizons and the timeless dance between human ambition and the wild freedom that has always called to something deep within our souls.
And so, dear friends, as our gentle journey through time continues to unfold like a soft blanket wrapping around us, let us pause to reflect on this common thread that weaves through all these stories. The eternal human desire for movement, for connection, for the freedom to choose our own path across the landscapes of possibility. From the medieval lovers stealing glances across crowded marketplaces, to the nomadic queens riding across endless steppes, from the Chinese laborers suspended in baskets above Sierra Nevada cliffs, to the indigenous peoples whose ancient trails became railroad rights-of-way, we see the same fundamental human need, the longing to transcend the boundaries that others would place around us. Think of how movement shaped each of these tales. Medieval courtship was all about the careful choreography of approach and retreat, the delicate dance of getting closer while respecting the invisible barriers of social convention. Young hearts learned to speak in the language of motion, a ribbon dropped and retrieved, a glance that lingered just a moment longer than propriety allowed, a walk that just happened to take the same path at the same time each day. The nomadic peoples we visited understood movement as the very essence of freedom. Their homes traveled with them, their wealth walked on four legs, and their borders were as fluid as the seasons. They didn't conquer land so much as they danced with it, following the rhythms of grass and weather, always ready to pack up and move toward better pastures or away from approaching threats. Even Tomeris, fierce as she was in battle, embodied this principle of movement. She knew when to advance and when to retreat, when to set a trap and when to spree it. Her victory over Cyrus came not from standing still and absorbing his assault, but from understanding the terrain and using mobility as her greatest weapon. The transcontinental railroad, for all its violence and displacement, was ultimately about movement too, the dream of shrinking vast distances, of allowing people and goods to flow freely across a continent, of connecting isolated communities to the larger currents of commerce and communication. But perhaps what's most beautiful about all these stories is how they remind us that the desire to move, to connect,
to transcend our limitations is something that lives deep in the human heart. It's the same impulse that makes a medieval peasant girl slip a flower into a young man's cart, that drives a nomadic warrior to ride toward the horizon, that inspires railroad workers to blast through mountains that seem impossible to cross. As you feel your own body settling deeper into comfort tonight, as your breathing slows and your muscles relax, remember that you too are part of this great human story of movement and connection. Even in stillness, even in sleep, you are traveling through dreams, through memories, through the peaceful landscape of rest that awaits you.
Let us drift now, dear friends, into the quieter spaces between these grand historical moments, where the real wisdom often dwells. In the spaces between the famous battles and the celebrated achievements, there lived countless ordinary people whose small acts of courage, love, and resilience created the true foundation upon which all history rests. Think of the Chinese workers whose names we'll never know, who woke each morning in their snow-buried camps and chose to face another day of dangerous, back-breaking labor. What dreams sustained them through those bitter Sierra Nevada winters? What letters did they write to families they might never see again? What songs did they sing to keep their spirits alive in the darkness of those mountain tunnels? Consider the medieval women who learned to navigate the complex rules of courtship and marriage, finding ways to express their authentic selves within systems designed to limit their choices. The young nun who discovered that her heart could hold both spiritual devotion and human love, and who had to choose between them. The peasant widow who found unexpected strength in managing her own land, her own decisions, for the first time in her life. Remember the nomadic elders who carried entire libraries of wisdom in their memories, who could recite genealogies stretching back a dozen generations, who knew the secret locations of water sources and safe passages that meant the difference between life and death for their people. When they died, entire worlds of knowledge died with them, but they lived on in the stories passed down around campfires, in the skills taught from parent to child, in the deep understanding of how to live in harmony with an unpredictable world. Even Tomiris herself, for all her legendary fierceness, was at her core a mother grieving the loss of her son. Her famous victory wasn't just about military strategy or political power. It was about a parent's love transformed into an unstoppable force for justice. In her story, we see how personal loss can become the catalyst for historical change, how individual grief can reshape the fate of empires. These forgotten voices remind us that history isn't just about the famous and powerful. It's about all the quiet moments of human connection, all the small acts of kindness and courage that happen far from the spotlight. The medieval baker who slipped an extra roll into a hungry child's basket, the nomadic warrior who shared water with a stranger, the railroad worker who helped an injured colleague despite the risk to his own safety. Tonight, as you prepare to join the great community of sleepers around the world, you become part of this continuous human story. Your own dreams and hopes and struggles are threads in the same vast tapestry that includes medieval lovers and nomadic queens and railroad builders. Your own quiet courage, your own capacity for love and resilience connects you to every person who has ever looked up at the same stars and wondered about their place in the grand scheme of things. Let their whispered wisdom comfort you now, that every life matters, every story has value, and every person who has ever lived has contributed something precious to the ongoing human adventure. And now, dear friends, as we approach the gentle conclusion of our evening journey together, let us turn our attention to something that all of these historical figures, from medieval peasants to nomadic warriors to railroad workers, understood in ways that our modern world sometimes forgets. The sacred importance of rest, of renewal, of allowing ourselves to be still and to dream. In medieval times, the rhythm of life followed the natural cycles of day and night in ways that our artificially lit world has largely abandoned. When the sun set, work stopped. Families gathered around fires or oil lamps, told stories, mended tools and clothing, and gradually prepared their bodies and minds for sleep. There was a recognition that rest wasn't laziness or wasted time, but an essential part of human flourishing. The nomadic peoples we visited understood this rhythm even more deeply. Their lives were attuned to the cycles of the seasons, to the migration patterns of animals, to the subtle changes in weather and terrain that told them when to move and when to remain still. They knew that both animals and humans need periods of rest and recovery, that strength comes not from constant motion, but from the wise alternation between activity and stillness. Even in the brutal world of railroad construction, workers learned to honor their need for rest. After 12-hour days of backbreaking labor, they would gather around campfires, share stories and songs from their homelands, play simple games, and allow their exhausted bodies to recover. Those who forgot to rest, who pushed themselves beyond all reasonable limits, often paid the price in injury, illness, or worse. Sleep itself was understood by our ancestors as something sacred, a time when the boundary between the ordinary world and the realm of dreams became permeable. Dreams were seen not as random neural activity, but as messages, as journeys into other realms, as ways of processing the events of waking life and preparing for the challenges ahead. In this understanding, the act of preparing for sleep was a kind of ritual. Medieval people said prayers, reviewed the events of their day, made peace with any conflicts or worries that might disturb their rest. Nomadic peoples often slept under stars that seemed close enough to touch, feeling themselves part of the vast cosmic dance of earth and sky. Even railroad workers, exhausted as they were, often found moments of profound peace in the simple act of lying down after a hard day's work. Tonight, as you follow in their footsteps towards sleep, you're participating in one of humanity's oldest and most universal practices. You're allowing your busy mind to slow down, your tense muscles to relax, your worried heart to find peace. You're trusting in the ancient wisdom that says rest is not a luxury, but a necessity, not a sign of weakness, but a source of strength. Let yourself sink into that trust now. Let your breathing deepen and slow. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a peaceful evening sky. Let yourself feel connected to all the millions of people who have found comfort in sleep before you, and to all those who are seeking rest at this very moment around the world.
And so, dear friends, our peaceful journey together draws to its gentle close, like the last notes of a lullaby fading into the quiet of night. We have traveled together through centuries and continents, visiting medieval villages where young hearts learned to speak in whispered tokens, crossing endless steppes where nomadic queens commanded the wind itself, climbing mountain passes where determined workers carved paths through solid stone. We have seen how love finds a way even in the most restrictive circumstances, how freedom calls to the human spirit even when surrounded by walls and rules, how courage emerges even in the face of seemingly impossible obstacles. We have witnessed the small, quiet acts of daily heroism that really shape history, the letter written in secret, the hospitality offered to strangers, the decision to keep working even when everything seems hopeless. But perhaps most importantly, we have been reminded that we are all part of this continuing human story. Your own struggles and dreams, your own capacity for love and courage, your own need for rest and renewal, These connect you to every person who has ever lived, who has ever loved, who has ever looked up at the night sky and felt both infinitely small and infinitely significant. Thank you for spending these peaceful hours with me, for allowing these stories to carry you gently toward rest. If this helped you unwind and find the sleep you were seeking, please remember to subscribe to our growing community of evening wanderers. A gentle like and share would mean the world to me, and if you have suggestions for future journeys we might take together, perhaps the quiet libraries of ancient Alexandria, or the misty highlands where Celtic legends were born, or the gentle wisdom of medieval monasteries where monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, please leave them in the comments below. The stories are endless, dear friends, and the night is patient, and there will always be another evening when we can meet again in this peaceful space between day and dreams. Until then, let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of waves on distant shores. Let your thoughts scatter like dandelion seeds on a summer breeze. Let sleep come as naturally as morning mists settling over quiet valleys. Feel yourself surrounded by the warm presence of all who have sought rest before you, and know that in this moment you are exactly where you need to be. The medieval lovers have found their way to dreams of token exchanges and stolen glances. The nomadic warriors rest beneath star-filled skies, their horses grazing peacefully nearby. The railroad workers sleep the deep sleep of honest exhaustion, dreaming of the day when their great work will finally be complete. And you, dear friend, you too can rest now. You too can let go of the day's worries and sink into the soft embrace of sleep. Let these stories become part of your dreams tonight, gentle companions accompanying you into the realm of rest and renewal. Sleep well, dear friends. Sleep peacefully. Know that somewhere in the vast tapestry of human experience, all these stories continue, woven together by the simple human need to find meaning, beauty, and connection in our brief time beneath the stars. Rest well, dream sweetly, and good night.